My name is Madeline Broadway and I'm currently enrolled in EDO 33441 Teaching in Rural and Remote Communities for Semester 2 2017. So this PowerPoint presentation outlines my lesson sequence for Assignment 1, but more importantly, the different pedagogies that I've chosen to incorporate, the different considerations I've made for students within my class, and different learning strategies included as well. So first, to introduce, multi-age grouping is just one of the devices used to organise classrooms in Queensland schools. It's the deliberate mixing of children from various age groups of more than 1 year in one class. This form of classroom grouping is extremely common in rural and remote communities, as schools may only have a small population and it's unrealistic for one teacher to teach a grade, as there may only be 1 to 2 students within that grade. So research has highlighted the benefits for both teachers and children when learning and teaching in multi-age classrooms. So firstly, there's leadership opportunities for older students. There's extension opportunities for younger students. Younger students tend to model their behaviour off older students. Students have the opportunity to work at their own independent levels. And there's social development opportunities, as well as siblings often being placed within the same classroom. So my lesson sequence takes place at Sandy Plains State School. It's a school located 900 kilometres west of Brisbane, and the school community consists predominantly of students from surrounding properties, with the main industry being cattle and sheep farming. The student population at Sandy Plains fluctuates between 75 and 80 students within the whole school. There are 8 full-time teachers, including myself, employed, and 6 teacher aides. Almost 35% of the school community identifies as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background, and we've implemented a range of strategies and programs in accordance with Closing the Gap targets and policies. So this lesson sequence features, the lesson sequence featured in this presentation is designed for a primary classroom of 27 students from years 4 to 6. Students within the class have abilities ranging from year 3 to 6, and there's one gifted student whom is particularly interested in science and maths but shows very little interest in English. There are 2 Indigenous students from within the class for whom English is a second language, and they require further assistance and attention. EALD students are those for whom their first language is a language or dialect other than English, and they require additional support to assist them to develop proficiency in English. EALD students at Sandy Plains State School identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and for some their first language is an Indigenous language, including traditional languages, related varieties, or Aboriginal language. So to personalise the learning for EALD students, a learning progression must be used to identify where the student is in their English development and what teachings and instructions are required to move them to the next stage of language development. So the benefits of having an EALD student in a multi-age classroom is that there's more opportunity for that student to learn at the level of their English proficiency with other students, rather than to be isolated in an age-level classroom with students who may have a higher proficiency in English than them. The students in our class whom identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, our teacher aide Kath is hired as a full-time Indigenous education worker. She brings particular and specialised knowledge and skills to the workplace that include a deep concern about the future of Indigenous students and insights to the problems that they're facing. She brings her own personal experiences and stories, familiarity with the local Indigenous communities and families, and knowledge of contact points from within the various Indigenous communities and organisations. Kath is employed to work closely in the classroom support roles and assist EALD students and students whom identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So this just shows the Australian curriculum that is used as a focus for our lesson sequence. So the Year 4 students will focus on creating literary text by developing storylines, characters and settings. They're required to complete activities that ask them to plan, compose, sequence and prepare literary text using photographs that convey setting, characters and points of drama in the plot. The Year 4 students are completing sequence activities to familiarise themselves with concepts that they'll be assessed on towards the end of the term, which is approximately 4 weeks away. The Year 5 students will focus on creating literary text using realistic and fantasy settings and characters that have drawn upon the worlds represented in the text or the worlds that students have experienced themselves. Within the sequence, students must work to consider how and why particular traits for a character have been chosen, and they can do that by creating mind maps of their thoughts so they can express their thought patterns and disassemble text to discuss specific features of a character or a setting using a visual stimulus. The Year 6 students are to experiment with text structure, language features, and their effects in creating literary text by using imagery, sentence variation, metaphors, and word choice. So these students are introduced to sensational story starters that ask them to use sensory language to convey vivid pictures of place, feelings, and events to just capture the interest of their audiences. So, evaluating and monitoring assessment. The sequence is situated between the middle and the beginning of a unit plan. So, students are learning crucial elements of the curriculum, which they will use later in the semester to create narrative text for an end-of-term assessment. They've previously completed narrative tasks in prior years, but will have minimal experience in engaging with the activities used specifically within this lesson plan. The formative assessments used are strategic whole class and individual questioning, observing student participation during learning activities, recorded student progress on a checklist, and facilitated whole class or peer feedback sessions. So we want to encourage student self-reflection as well, and we're going to use exit strategies at the end of each session, but I'll discuss that later. Summative assessments include annotated student work samples and collecting and reviewing the student work samples from each session as well. So there is spelling words and spelling tests incorporated into my lesson sequence. So the spelling words are introduced on Monday and they're set as homework, and class activities are based around them throughout the week as well to prepare the students for a Friday test. So the Year 4s will be using knowledge of sound and visual patterns and write more complex letter combinations that have multiple representations in writing, so boy and boil. The Year 5s are using knowledge of known words and base words to spell new ones, so using vision to help them spell television or revision. And the Year 6s are focusing on expanding their knowledge of prefixes and suffixes and exploring meaning relationships between words. So, for example, disappearance, submarine, subterranean, poisonous, and nervous. Focusing on guided reading. So each student prior to our guiding reading sessions had been assessed to determine their individual instructional reading levels, or their IRLs. And then from there, different books have been chosen for different reading groups. So the Wizards, as you can see, are reading Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. That's a level T, so a high, very high grade 3 or a low to mid grade 4. The Dragons are reading Razor and the Wolves, which is a mid grade 4 to high grade 4. And the Monsters are reading a grade 5 leveled book called Building the Nation. This book is also available though in a multi-level version for very high grade 5s or grade 6 readers as well. And this just allows different readers to be able to join in with the same activities as the Monsters, but still be academically challenged as well. So all of our guided reading lessons are constructed using Lucan Freebody's 4 resource model. So that just describes what the student needs to do to be literate, basically. So the code-breaking resources, the text participant resources, text using resources, and text analyzing resources. And this just helps the students to practice what they have to do to break down the combination of letters used in text, make literate and inferral meanings of text, focus on real-life reading situations, and helps students to actually understand how the text works. So the first guided reading session focuses on prediction and questioning. So the students, before they actually start, they'll look at the title of the book and the cover of the book and maybe possibly read the blurb as well. From there, the teacher aide guiding the session will ask questions like, why do you think the author chose this title? Can you predict what genre this title is written in and what it might be about? And what text features could you expect to find in this genre? What does the title or the cover suggest that the text is about? So this just introduces students to actually get into those text analysis, text user, code breaker, and text participant strategies so that they can start thinking about what a book may be about before they're actually starting to read it. They'll start to read the book from that first session to either confirm or deny those predictions and questions as well. The guided reading sessions number 2 will revisit the text, and they'll discuss different language features, moods and styles. So once again, just confirming if those predictions had been confirmed or rejected and why that was. What are the main ideas of the text? Were there any questions answered by the text? And what clues are in the text to help you work out what this word means? So once again, just getting the students to start practicing those 4 different areas of the resource model. And the guided reading session number 3 is an overview and discussion of the text followed by a group sequence activity. So rather than incorporating the Luke and Freebody 4 different areas, it's more focusing on interpreting the text for the final guided readers session. So they're asked to complete the book, discuss the book within a group, and then actually create a sequence of events. So using a large butcher's paper, as a group of 4 or 5, however many students are within that group, they're asked to sequence the story as they've been doing in the previous lessons with their normal reading books or with their visual stimulus that they've been given. And then for each event of the story, they're to write 1 to 2 sentences, and that just starts to get them to personally reflect on their reading and use that as a comprehension strategy as well. So this is an overview of my lesson plan. This is just the first one, but it gives you an idea of what the lesson plans do look like. It starts off with an introduction from 10 to 10:10. From there you can see that it's color coded. So for blue, that means guided reading. For orange, you are with a teacher. Purple is actually group work with teacher assistance, and pink is individual work or think, pair, share activities. So I just wanted to break down different areas of my lesson plans with you as well. We've already done the guided reading, and yeah, here you go. All right, so warm up and warm down. So both of these periods last for 10 minutes, focusing just on warm up though. This section of the lesson for every single session is just to give a short explanation of the tasks that the kids are going to be completing within the session. And it's to explain the group schedule of where they need to be at what time and with who and what they'll be doing. So this schedule, just like what the lesson plan looked like, will actually be blown up and left on the interactive whiteboard for the kids to look at if they're confused during the lesson or if they're not quite sure where they want to go. So the kids are encouraged to ask different questions during that time and just go through all of those together really. They'll also be using WALT, so it's an education acronym used to explain the learning concept and understanding and skills that are to occur within that lesson to students. So it means we are learning to, and it helps students understand what they need to be learning throughout the lesson because it's made so explicitly clear at the beginning and it stays up on the board as a constant instruction. So for example, in lesson 1, the wizards are learning to build and describe a character. The dragons are learning to describe a character and a story using a mind map. And the monsters are learning to start the story in the action. So from there, the lesson will obviously continue, and then right at the end during the warm down there's another 10 minutes allocated just to sort of unpack and ask questions about the lesson. So children are encouraged to ask whatever they like and then the teacher will obviously answer them. There's also an exit strategy that will be used, and it'll just ask simple questions or ask to see the work of students from during the session just to confirm that they've stayed on task throughout the lesson. So using lesson 1 as an example as well. So the wizards, what type of story did you write for your character and why? The dragons are just to simply show their mind map, so show they're working from the lesson. And the monsters are asked to attempt to start a sensational story starter from a stimulus. So I might say, okay, have a look at the window and think in your head what a sensational story starter may be. Also, this is a time to ask the students if they've achieved their learning goals for today, and that's just a way of using WALT in the warm down as well, and just reassessing whether they actually achieved what they were learning to do within that lesson. So these are some different strategies that are also used throughout my lesson plans. So the I do, we do, you do strategy is introduced in all of the activities where a teacher is with the student, and that just explicitly shows them how to do something, gives them an example and works through it together, and so during the independent session that follows, they can confidently complete a task by themselves, hence the you do section. The explicit teaching is used throughout the warm down and also the I do, we do sections to explicitly show what a student needs to be doing, which will obviously help them in the you do sections or into any individual work that they have from there. Think, pair, share activities are usually in individual learning allocated times, and that just increases the socialisation between the class and also encourages students to peer assess each other's work. It helps to keep them on task and keep them doing what they need to be doing, and they also sort of challenge each other a little bit, I think. So the Year 4s, they will be focusing on characterisation. So within their lesson sequence, they'll be particularly focusing on prediction, using visual stimulus when they're giving a visual stimulus, so it might be a picture of a park or something, it's to then start to think about what their interpretation of that is, so engaging their real life experiences and their authenticity, and just beginning to actually think more about a visual stimulus before writing about it. So that's their biggest challenge throughout their lesson sequence. Year 5s are learning to mind map, so they're recording that trail of thoughts on paper. So it might start with a bubble in the middle with a picture of a park, and then from there they'll write down what colours they may see, what it smells like, what previous experiences they've had in that park. And once again, it's just bringing in the authenticity of the task and asking them to think about their prior experiences in different situations like that, and engaging that in their learning to make it a little bit more meaningful. The mind maps will also work as a scaffolding for writing. So when it comes to times that they're writing their stories and they feel like they might be getting stuck or something is wrong and they can't figure out what to write next, they can refer back to that mind map just as like a scaffold. So they might be stuck in the middle of a sentence and they can look back and go, oh, right, I could write the next sentence about feeling the grass in my feet while I'm running to kick the soccer ball. The Year 6s are really focusing on those sensational story starters, so relating that back to the curriculum, it's using those vivid words and pictures in our minds to help create a feeling within our audience. So we want them to be able to start in the action and be using their 5 senses in their writing, so thinking about what they can hear, what they can see, what they can taste, what they can touch, and definitely what they can smell as well, just to help paint that picture for their audiences. There is a little bit of mind mapping just to help them with their trail of thought as well, and just to refer back to when they do get lost, and also visual stimuluses to help them as well. So pictures, photographs, newspapers, magazines, those sorts of things. So that's the end of my presentation. I think it ran a little bit long, so I'm sorry for that. But I hope you enjoy looking at this in coordination with my lesson plans 1, 2, and 3. And my 250 words describes the different curriculum inserts that I've chosen for this, and also the different differentiation tactics that I've used to help incorporate the English as second language or dialect learners, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait learners, and students who may be visually impaired, hearing impaired, or physically impaired within my classroom as well. Thank you very much.